India says it's fighting terrorists in Kashmir who are supported by Pakistan. But is it India's heavy-handed approach that's pushing some people towards violence? I'm Imran Garda, and today's Newsmakers, we ask why a young Kashmiri became a suicide bomber. On February 14th, Adil Ahmed Dar drove a car filled with explosives into a convoy carrying Indian soldiers. More than 40 were killed in the deadliest terror attack in Indian-administered Kashmir in decades. Hours later, a video was released in which Dar showed no remorse for what he was planning. In the aftermath, tensions between India and Pakistan reached a boiling point. India blamed the Pakistan-based militant group Jaish-e-Mohammed for the attack. Islamabad denied the charges. A war of words ensued with the two nuclear-armed nations on the brink of a major showdown. And Dar's attack was the catalyst. So, what drove him to become a militant? Haider Abbasi explores.
Kashmir, a territory split between India and its rival Pakistan. 7 decades of animosity reached a new peak in February after an attack on Indian soldiers. At least 40 were killed in the district of Pulwama. India blames the Pakistan-based group Jaish-e-Mohammed for the attack. But it was a local of Indian-administered Kashmir who carried it out. The worst on Indian forces in 3 decades. TRT World's documentary series Off the Grid gained rare access to the father of the suicide bomber, Adil Dar. Adil left home 2 years ago. He reappeared as the man who would bring India and Pakistan to the brink of war. Ghulam Hassan Dar says Adil changed after being humiliated by Indian soldiers.
He was forced to circle an army vehicle while rubbing his nose on the ground. He took this as an insult. He felt very badly about it. He came back crying. I told him these things happen, but what can we do? This is how things are over here. I tried to calm him. We did our best, but this incident left a scar in his mind.
India and Pakistan have fought 3 wars over Kashmir, dividing the territory between the two. The Indian army was heavily deployed to the region in the early 1990s to crush an armed rebellion believed to be backed by Pakistan. Tens of thousands have been killed in the last 3 decades in the uprisings and crackdowns that followed.
It is a conflict that has robbed millions of their basic human rights and continues to this day to inflict untold suffering.
Regular protests against India's presence here often turn violent, and rights groups say the response from Indian forces often amounts to torture. So are the actions of Indian forces pushing young people to join militant groups? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
As you saw there in the report, there was a clip from an interview with the father of Adil Ahmed Dar. It was part of TRT World's documentary series Off the Grid. You can see the full program, Kashmir Fault Lines in the Valley, on Thursday at 21:30 GMT. Let's go to the discussion now. Joining me now from Srinagar is Parvez Imroz. He's the founder of the Jammu Kashmir Civil Society. It led to the discovery of mass graves in Indian-administered Kashmir. From Ibiza, we're joined by Sudhanshu Mittal, a senior official in India's ruling BJP party. And in Lansborough is Mohammed Junaid. He's an associate professor of anthropology at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts with a focus on Kashmir. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Mohammed Junaid, the big question, the main question, especially after Pulwama, people were asking, why and how did a young Kashmiri become a suicide bomber that could blow up 40 CRPF officers?
Thank you. So one of the important things that this report brings to attention is the systematic nature of torture in Kashmir, how so many people go through the hands of the state and come out injured physically, mentally, with scars left for life. A lot of people in Kashmir do not have resources to deal with that kind of experience. And the experience of Adil Ahmad Dar, who, as news reports had suggested, had been shot in the leg previously and had gone through that experience. We don't know what leads the path from being tortured to taking what one might conceive as a revenge. So I think that this report shows us the path or the reasons behind why somebody like Adil Ahmad Dar could take an extreme step like that.
Sudhanshu Mittal, is the system of governance in the valley especially creating and perpetuating the conditions for militancy?
What has just been stated has been the biggest lie I've ever heard. Has he seen the statement, the video of Mr. Dar, who became a Fidain and who killed the 40 innocent Indian security personnel? He never talked about Kashmir at all. It was all about Islam. It was all about Islamic identity. It was all about enforcement of Islamic beliefs. Kashmir was not even mentioned. And look how the story is being twisted. Let us discuss. Is it Kashmir or is it Islam? We have witnessed Islamic terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism across the world. Now to masquerade an event like this as an issue of Kashmir is shocking. It surprises me that a learned professor from the US can perpetrate such lies. Professor, please see his testimony. Please see the video where he explains what he's doing. He talks about Islam and not Kashmir. Kashmir was not even an issue for him.
Okay.
You know, for far too long,
so allow me to
the
come in here.
militants
So
have been using such people to discredit
the
Indian forces.
Okay, let's get a response from Mohammed Junaid. And Pervez, I'm not ignoring you. I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I want to get a response from Mohammed Junaid because according to Sudhanshu, you've just said the biggest lie that he has ever heard. So, response.
So, first of all, of course, Mr. Mittal, who is a learned politician himself, cannot ignore the fact that Kashmir is Muslim. You know, it is primarily a Muslim state, and there's a large majority of people there who follow their faith. And you cannot simply demonize a faith and claim that somehow that faith is responsible for somebody taking that step. The key question is that a person undergoes an experience, and what makes, okay, let's assume that this person had radical ideology. What made it possible for him to accept that ideology? What experiences had he gone through? I mean, you cannot ignore the fact that Kashmir is under a military occupation. There are close to 750,000 Indian soldiers. They have occupied all public spaces in Kashmir. It is impossible to navigate that space without...
Okay, so let me come in here, right? So
you can call it clever, it's your right.
Fair enough. I want to ask Pervez on the ground. Hold on, Sudhanshu, just a second. You'll have an opportunity again. Pervez, on the ground, is it clear to you, from a human rights perspective, that particularly young people are facing a very heavy-handed approach from the state?
You see, the government of India, you know, that they were following the doctrine of subconventional warfare. If you see that in their doctrine, they say that they have to break the will of the people, right? And the government of India, and the other thing is that why there's such a disproportionate number of the army, you know, more than 600,000 Indian army in Kashmir from last 28 years, you know. And also they have been given the legal impunity. They are given the all sort of impunity, whether it is legal impunity, political impunity, or no moral impunity. And if you see the statement of the Indian Prime Minister in February, that army has given the free hand. So this is completely, if you see in Kashmir, you know that the disproportionate number of the army here fighting 300 militant. You know, that is if we see officially. But in reality, the fact is that they are here to control people. You know, and one of the way of controlling people is the torture. That is what we have mentioned in the report. Torture, the Indian state's instrument of control in Jammu and Kashmir. So we have been saying, for example, that torture is one of the phenomena of human rights violations in Kashmir. You know, otherwise there are other forms also. As you rightly said that in 2008 we have identified the mass graves here, and there are 8,000 disappearances in Kashmir, and Government of India has never ever bothered, because the Government of India is convinced that they, being the largest democracy, can get away with everything they will do in Kashmir. In 2008, that European Parliament passed a resolution. They urged Government of India to hold investigation into the mass graves.
Right.
So coming to torture, this report about the 432 cases we have mentioned here, in which we have said this is just the tip of the iceberg here.
Okay.
Torture, if in other places in the world, like Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib, that why it becomes a huge international issue.
Okay.
And there was a whole worldwide condemnation. But in Kashmir, where there are tens of thousands of torture victims here, and all sort of conventional and unconventional torture has been inflicted,
let
and
me
is
go
being
to
still
Sudhanshu.
inflicted.
Parvez, give me a second here. So let me go to Sudhanshu. So Sudhanshu, we look at the reports of the human rights groups, and we have reports of incredible torture. So you have sleep deprivation, you have waterboarding, sodomy, all forms of rape. We have youngsters going to protest and being blinded by pellets. Can you at the very least admit that this stuff might lead young people with no opportunities to possibly join militant groups? Do you at least concede that?
You see, both of these are the faces, civilized faces of the militants and the terrorists of Jammu and Kashmir. And both are perpetrating lies. I just pointed out what Junaid had to say. He was talking about Dhar, who himself said Kashmir was not an issue, only Islam was an issue. You heard the other gentleman now. Let me expose his lies also. He has been using the name of civil society to discredit the Indian armed forces. Now, if he's a man of the civil society, he must agree that every civil society swears by the rule of law.
But aren't
the Holy Bible...
Aren't the Indian armed forces discrediting themselves by torturing inmates? That's my question. Why are you attacking the messenger?
No, they are not, because India is not a banana republic. Please understand, India has a very independent judiciary. Indian government cannot dictate, give immunity for criminality. Anybody who violates law is punishable, and Indian judiciary is known worldwide for its independence. Look at the number of cases where police officers are in jail because they've chosen to take law in their own hands. Now, to the extent that Supreme Court ordered that wherever there is an encounter, there has to be an FIR. So India is not a banana republic. What they have been trying to do is to give justification to the terrorists who have been on the run.
Okay, so let me get a response from Parvez. Parvez, are you... Hold on,
has made a very determined effort.
Parvez,
to
are you giving justification?
Terrorism. Can I just finish?
Hold on. Parvez, are you giving justification for the terrorists?
I would have liked Parvez to tell me about, he's from the civil society, he should have told me about what happened to the Kashmiri Pandits. Why was there an ethnic cleansing in Jammu and Kashmir?
Parvez,
you just heard Junaid saying
Sudhanshu,
Kashmir is a Muslim country.
I've asked Parvez a question. I've asked Parvez a question.
He's not letting me speak. I mean, if you can if there can be a civilized discussion, then we can continue. The question is that has there been any response from the Government of India on this report? No. Has there been any conviction of the army persons here in Kashmir for the violation they have committed? No. Has judiciary, which has no powers in Jammu and Kashmir, which he is saying, gentleman is saying that India has a very independent judiciary, and we have here because I am living in Kashmir, I am not living outside, and as a practicing lawyer, there are 5,000 contempt petitions in the J&K state because the executive and the law enforcement officials are not carrying the orders. I say one thing that, and as far the terrorism is concerned, repeatedly these people are addicted with the word of terrorism. Anybody opposed to that? Terrorism is a related term. For us, the terrorists are the forces here who are committing war crimes, who are committing crimes against humanity. Terrorism, and in Kashmir, if we see the definition of terrorism internationally, meaning that if the civilians are being tortured, are being killed, unarmed, and in this report, 70% cases of torture of the civilian people there. That is terrorism. Occupation, if we say that, they say is the highest form of terrorism. So terrorism related, and these people are always,
Okay, but Pervez
always trying to shut the mouth
is
of the
killing
next. Yeah.
40 Indian CRPF members terrorism as well.
No, we are not. I, as a civil society activist, I am not advocating
19
violence.
killed. Yesterday, 5 people killed.
Hold on, the man's
I
answering the question.
believe, I, as a Kashmiri, believe in the non-violent conflict resolution of Kashmir. Kashmir is an issue. People here want the right of self-determination here. That is true. That's a reality, which even has been acknowledged by the United Nations. It is the resolution of the United Nations military observer group presence is in Kashmir is there. Question is whether the government of India, why government of India as a sovereign responsible country is not allowing the special rapporteurs of UN here. Why government of India has rejected the last year the report of the UN High Commissioner's report and not giving the access to the international mechanisms.
So that's a fair question. And allow me to come in here and let me ask Sudhanshu, if India has nothing to hide, why not allow that commission of inquiry that the UN Human Rights Council wants to hold and have to probe what's going on the ground in Kashmir?
We are an independent sovereign country. We are a democracy which is acclaimed by the world. We have a judiciary. We have a human rights commission. These are the institutions. They are the ones who are authorized to do that. Let him approach them and let him get anything conducted. Who has a problem? Again, he's a liar. When I say he's a liar, let me tell you one thing. In 1956, the people of Jammu and Kashmir themselves enacted the Jammu and Kashmir constitution, which says Jammu Kashmir is an integral part of India.
Do we want to talk about 1947, 1956?
And Lashkar-e-Toiba.
Okay.
These are the two.
Do we want to have a history discussion or do we want to discuss what's going on?
I am willing to talk to him about anything he has.
Okay, so how about, for the sake of this discussion, let's talk about the current context on the ground.
Responsibility of terrorism.
Okay.
Is he condemning them?
Okay, I want to ask Mohammed Junaid.
Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Toiba and
Mohammed Junaid.
These are the organizations.
So Sudhanshu, you've thrown out a bunch of rhetorical questions here, right? So Mohammed Junaid, on the one hand, we have the state saying that Pakistan is supporting militant groups, picking off these young people and exploiting them and using them for terrorism against India in Kashmir. On the other hand, we have people saying this is homegrown. This is a homegrown response to a homegrown problem because of brutality and military occupation within Kashmir, and these people need self-determination. I guess the question is it a combination of both at this moment in time?
Look, at the heart of this question that I want to ask Mr. Mittal is also that on one side, India does claim Kashmir to be part of India, and it claims Kashmiris to be citizens. On the other hand, it denies Kashmiris some of the basic fundamental rights that are given to its citizenry. Like he said, India is a functioning democracy. And okay, that's fine. But this democracy does not extend to Kashmir. Like Parvez Imroz Sahab asked him whether this report will be discussed in the Indian Parliament. Or the State Human Rights Commission has made several recommendations over the years to the government of India, and no prosecution has taken place. How can a country which claims to be a democracy treat its so-called citizens like this? This is totally unethical. You cannot claim that Kashmiris are citizens and then treat them as enemies. I mean, where is the question of Pakistan in all of this? You can keep talking about Pakistan, you can talk about terrorism and Islam and all of those things, but at the root is the question of citizenship here. Do you want to treat Kashmiris as citizens? And if you treat them as citizens as you continue to claim, then give them those basic rights that you give people in India.
Sudhanshu Mittal?
Again, he's a liar. In the Indian Parliament, umpteen number of times, Kashmir has been discussed. And umpteen number of times documents have been placed on the floor of house. So if he does not know it, he should not make these comments. Secondly, he's silent about the ethnic cleansing. You know, in Kashmir, the Kashmiri Pandits in one single day were driven out of that state. More than 300,000 Kashmiri Pandits had to leave their houses. Their women were raped, they were killed, their houses, the establishments were ransacked. And these were the people who remained quiet.
If we are to say
silent.
terrible things happen to Hindu Pandits, Sudhanshu, terrible, hold on. Are we saying because terrible things happen to Hindu Pandits historically and they were pushed out of the valley by Muslims, that means that a permanent state of military occupation, lockdowns, blinding kids with pellets, torturing them in prisons, is justifiable because they bear the burdens of the past?
I am so surprised at your question itself. If terrorists and militants are killing people, they were earlier killing the Kashmiri Pandits, then they were killing the Muslims there. If they continue to kill the army personnel, in fact yesterday, 5 security personnel were killed yesterday. None of these human rights activists even made one noise. None of them condemned it. Have they condemned Lashkar-e-Toiba? Have they condemned Jaish-e-Mohammed, which are organizations claiming that they were responsible for this brutal killing? They are the ones who are claiming that yes, we are militants and we will perpetrate violence. These are the people who are endorsing violence. In a state of, in any civilized society, rule of law is paramount. Rule of law does not permit anybody to take law in his own hand.
Okay.
Now, these people want to selectively express themselves and say, the Indian forces are doing it. No, they are defending.
That should include
the
Indian
constitution of
security
this country.
forces
They are
as well.
defending the people of Kashmir.
I want
They
to
are
bring
defending
Pervez in
the
very
sovereignty
finely.
of the country.
Okay, so Sudhanshu, I want to bring in Pervez very finally, especially something I've noticed as an outsider in covering this story, that ever since the killing of Burhan Wani, which is now 3 years ago, the atmosphere has changed. Things are different on the ground, right? So never mind Pulwama recently, but this has been building up for about 3 years. Do you agree that over the past 3 years, things have just gotten worse?
No, things are same. I mean, for example, things is unlike, unfortunately, things are likely to, it will be the same. The control of the Indian army is increasing day by day, but the point is different. For example, the point is whether even in wars there are limits how the war should be conducted and how the combatant should behave, right? I'm just telling here that the Indian army, which is disproportionate, more than 600,000 army personnel here, fighting 300 militant and controlling the population in Kashmir, which want their right of self-determination. I say that the point is that how the Indian army should behave here.
But
Whether
Pervez,
they
do you
will,
accept, sorry to interrupt you very finally, do you accept that from their perspective, they're saying, we've put 600,000 army personnel to fight this militancy, and yet still 40 of our own are getting blown up, so we need to fight harder. Do you accept that perspective, Pervez?
I don't think, honestly, I don't feel, maybe I'll be wrong.
Pakistan has been perpetrating.
I don't feel that the army militaristic solution is Kashmir. Maybe for some time they'll be able to control. Maybe they will neutralize the all militant here one time, but it will again resurface in one or the other form, in a non-violent resistance form. I mean, you see, we have an example of the Palestine. How the the India is now completely following the footsteps of Palestine. It's the reality now. They are doing the same thing here. And the present government of the BJP, which has now a huge mandate, has gone. So they believe that only the militaristic solution is possible. They are not for a political solution, which is the reality, and they don't want to see the reality.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, the reality on the ground is indeed a terrible one, and this is why we're having this discussion. I'd love to invite you back on the program. I have to move on.
Us to hand over India to Pakistan.
I'd like to have you back on the program. I have to move on. Pervez Imroz, Sudhanshu Mittal, and Mohammed Junaid, thanks so much for joining us. Still to come, the world's wealthiest nations are selling their trash to Southeast Asia. Now some are sending it back. We ask what the world should do with its waste. And 3 Turkish soldiers are wounded in Idlib after the Syrian regime targets an observation post in the province. We ask a Syrian activist what's happening on the ground. No one wants garbage in their country, and many wealthy nations thought they had a solution: dump it elsewhere. So where did they send it? Well, the vast majority ended up in Southeast Asia, but it might not be staying there for long. Malaysia just returned 3,000 tons of plastic waste, and the Philippines sent 69 containers of rubbish back to Canada. So what's the solution? And should every country deal with its own waste? Natalie Perhonen takes a look.
Every minute, people buy 1 million plastic drinking bottles. Every year, we produce 300 million tons of plastic waste. Only a small portion of it can be recycled. But that recyclable waste is a commodity to be bought and sold. For decades, countries like the US, Canada, and Australia have been exporting their recyclables for processing. Recycling companies collect, sort, and store waste. Once there's enough material, it's then sent overseas. China used to be the world's largest importer of plastic for recycling, but that stopped in 2018. Now, any plastic waste going to China has to be 99.5% pure. That leaves almost no room for contamination. So companies had to find somewhere else to send their plastics, and that's mostly been Southeast Asia. It's meant an enormous surge in the amount of waste being sent to the region. Now those countries are getting fed up too. They say they don't want their nations to be a dumping ground for the developed world's trash. Malaysia is sending back 3,000 tons of waste to the EU and US. The government says that's because it was either contaminated, incorrectly labelled, or imported illegally. And the Philippines has also sent back nearly 70 containers of contaminated waste to Canada. Those shipments arrived more than 5 years ago. Plastic is a worldwide problem. So should every country shoulder the burden in their own backyard, or does the planet need a global solution?
Well, joining me now in Penang, Malaysia is Mageswari Sanggaralingam. She's a research officer at Friends of the Earth Malaysia, an independent non-profit organization. And in Northampton in the UK is Simon Ellen. He's the chief executive of the Recycling Association. I thank you both for joining us. Mageswari, let's begin with you. Big picture, after decades of trying, is our global recycling system failing?
Yeah, in terms of the import of plastic waste, we found that there was a hike in imports into Malaysia after China imposed a ban of household plastic waste imports into their country in January 2018. So we saw a spike of a lot of plastic waste was being imported into Malaysia, and we found that it was contaminated plastic waste, which some of it could not be recycled. And what happened was all this residual waste was left in the open dumps, and some of it got burnt, and this also created a lot of environmental pollution and also health impacts to communities.
Mageswari, tell me the difference. So firstly, who's sending this contaminated plastic waste to Malaysia? And tell me the difference between ordinary plastic waste and contaminated plastic waste.
Okay, in terms of plastic waste, which could be easily recycled, it would be clean plastics and also homogeneous. It's like just certain type of plastics. But once it is contaminated, it means it's dirty and also mixed plastics. So that is very difficult. And then there's also low-grade value plastics, which has no value for the recyclers. So this ends up as residual waste.
Are there any countries that are particularly bad at this?
In terms of the hike in imports, we found that US was one of the top countries which were exporting plastic waste to Malaysia.
I see. So Simon, we see that the Chinese decided and shocked everybody by saying we're no longer taking all of this, and the other countries have been filling that gap. And now we're seeing these countries push some of this back and say, sorry, we're not taking this because this is contaminated. Is it a global crisis?
No, not at all. Far from being a global crisis. I think we need to put it in context, and I would never sit here and pretend that it doesn't happen. I think that illegal shipments of plastics and other materials are the exception as opposed to the rule. I think the vast majority of exporting is compliant, but undoubtedly there are those operating on the periphery that are illegally exporting, and those are the ones that we need to clamp down on. And I would applaud Malaysia and any other country that receives material that's not compliant, that you send it back. But it's not a crisis in terms of illegal shipments. I think we maybe have a bit of getting towards a crisis in terms of world markets and availability of markets, but no, certainly in terms of shipping contaminated material, no, it's not a crisis.
So, Mageswari, what we're hearing from Simon is that we need to think of the big picture and put it in context. And perhaps, in terms of a business model, this is just the world readjusting to the Chinese opting out of this market. No more, no less. What's your response to that?
So in terms of after China imposed the ban, what we found was Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia found that a lot of waste was coming into our countries. And then in mid-2018, these three countries imposed the ban, restrictions of imports of plastic waste. But what happened next was the exporters were looking for some other countries to export their waste, and actually Turkey was one of the destinations for the exporters. And then later on, India also imposed a ban. So now the recyclers have to look for some other areas to send their waste. And what we have heard from some recyclers in US, so they could not ship out their waste. What they are doing is they will have to handle the waste themselves in their own countries. And in Malaysia, the Malaysian government and the customs, they found that there is also exporters who are falsely declaring the waste that they are sending to recipient countries.
How are they falsely declaring it?
So in terms of the, because you would have to have an HS code for scrap plastics. Mm-hmm. So that is 3915. So they declare it as something else. And also some of the waste which are also mixed. So that's why under the Basel Convention, during the meeting in May, about 187 countries are party to the Basel. So they decided that there should be strict enforcement, and also in terms of you need to get consent from the recipient countries if it is going to be dirty and contaminated waste which is being sent.
Mageswari, do you want stricter enforcement, or do you want stronger, newer regulations?
No, there are already regulations imposed by the recipient countries. Like, for instance, Malaysia says they will only accept clean and homogeneous plastics, and also the ability for the importers to recycle whatever plastic that is being brought in. So in 2018, some of the approved permits that were given out to importers, there were too many approved permits, and they did not check the capacity of the factories to process it. So if it is clean and homogeneous and the country is accepting it, then probably you do not have to clean the plastics. It just goes into the processing plants.
Okay.
So you have to regulate. Yeah.
Right. So Simon, would you agree that in the collection and the processing and the sorting and so on in the source countries, especially the Western countries, people need to do better, and perhaps the whole process needs to be more smoothly regulated so people don't pull a fast one and dump bad waste onto Southeast Asian countries?
I do. I agree with that, because I think what we mustn't escape from is that plastics and recycling plastics is a very valuable resource. It's very circular in its nature. It is a non-renewable fossil fuel. It is a finite resource, and we don't want to lose the material. So we do need to we do need to recycle it, and we do need good practices. But I do agree that we need to regulate it a bit better, and the proposed changes to the Basel Convention, whereby you will no longer be able to ship certain types of plastics, mixed plastics, in the current form, that you will actually need notification a much more sort of careful scrutiny to it. I do agree that that is the way forward, but I think that what we need to be looking at is looking at plastics as a resource, and we need to look at the whole supply chain of how we can improve things. We need to be producing less of the material. Although plastic is a fantastic material, fantastic packaging material, has many applications, is circular, is recyclable, is a valuable resource. Do we need to produce as much, and are there alternatives? Are there more environmentally alternatives? Such, for example, switching to fibre and to paper and to other materials. And I think to do that requires a full supply chain approach. Not just, for example, all the stuff that's happening in the UK, which I can cover later, but what's happening globally as well. We need to align everything, and we need incentives out there, to allow us to be better recyclers.
And so, Mageswari, a lot of individuals will be watching this and they'll be asking, well, what can I do? Because people have already made a leap, or they've taken a leap where they feel good about themselves after putting something in a recycle bin, right? And they feel, okay, well, I've played my part. Yeah. I've done my part. But now you're telling me that there's still this whole other big mess after all of this, that this is not even getting recycled because people are screwing up along the process, along the way. So what can individuals do to make this whole thing better?
Well, I think that,
okay, Simon, go ahead. You answer that, and then Mageswari after that. Go ahead, Simon. Yes.
I mean, I think we need to put this in context. Is that most of the materials that are recycled go in the recycling bin that are supposed to be recycled will be recycled. The problem that we have, and we have this, it's a huge problem in the UK, is that we're producing far too much of the material. It's very, very complicated. Even I, as an alleged expert, sometimes struggle in my own bin to say, can this or can this not be recycled? Because it's often a fusion of different polymers. There's different layers of it. It's food contaminated. It's the wrong colour, and it's incredibly confusing. And very importantly as well, it's not labelled, so the public don't know what to do. And what we're advocating, it's now happening in the UK, is that we're actually starting right at the top of the supply chain. So we're saying to the producer, we're introducing the polluter pays principle. So you've got to produce less, and what you do produce must be designed for recyclability. And if you don't design it for recyclability, then you're going to pay an awful lot of money through what we call extended producer responsibility. When we've got to that stage and we're actually producing materials that we can recycle, we've then got to label them so that you and I as the public will go to our recycling bin and we'll look on the bottom of the container and it will say recyclable, put it in your blue bin or whatever the colour might be. That can then go to the materials processing facility. We've got the technology to separate, sort, bale and produce very, very good quality commodities. And we've then got an application in a global marketplace. Whereas at the moment, we're producing too much. A lot of it's unrecyclable. The public don't know how to do it. They haven't got the appropriate facilities. The materials recovery facilities are producing the best material that they can, but often it's not good enough. And often with the widespread confusion, some of it ends up in the likes of Malaysia, and Malaysia saying, sorry, this isn't the material that we want. It's not good enough.
Mageswari, does that sound like a better plan to you?
Yeah, I agree with Simon, because we are also looking into getting consumers to use less plastics, and also for producers to redesign their products, and also in terms of packaging and delivery systems, so that at least we can eliminate the use of single-use plastics. Yeah, because these are some of the very low-grade value plastics which are used for packaging. So if we can have a different or a better alternative, then that is what we should look into. And there are also already many countries which are imposing bans on single-use plastics. So this is what we are calling for, and for consumers and also producers to break free from plastics. That is our call for everyone.
Okay. Well, I'm often accused of talking rubbish on this program. This is the first time that is 100% accurate, and I fully accept it. Mageswari Sangarelingam and Simon Ellen, I thank you both for joining us on the Newsmakers. It appears nowhere in Idlib is safe. That's despite the fact that the province in northwestern Syria was designated a secure buffer zone by a deal between Ankara and Moscow. Since April, it's been the battleground between Russian-backed forces and the rebels. On Wednesday, Moscow said it had brokered a new ceasefire, but it didn't last long, with airstrikes resuming on Thursday. Russia says it's fighting Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a former al-Qaeda affiliate. But Amnesty International says they've also been hitting civilian targets. And Turkey says Assad's forces hit one of its observation decks there, wounding 3 of its soldiers. In a moment, we'll speak to a Syrian activist who's been on the ground in Idlib. But first, let's take a look at what the last 2 months have looked like in Syria's final rebel stronghold. Well, joining me now on set here is Rania Qaisar. She's a Syrian-American activist and Chief Executive Volunteer Officer at the Syrian Humanitarian Institute for National Empowerment. Rania, good to talk to you in studio. The last time I spoke to you, you were in Idlib on a Skype connection, and danger was all around you. Danger still all around the people who live there in Idlib. I want to talk a little bit about politics initially, because we had news of a ceasefire once again, but then it's a movie that we've seen over and over again. Immediately afterwards, reports of airstrikes, shelling, and so on. On the ground, does it ever feel like there's a ceasefire?
Never. It has never stopped. For the last 4 years, the Russian military airstrikes have not stopped, and we have those documented by month and by date. The Russians are always trying to pretend that they are going for a ceasefire, either when they are losing or when they need to recuperate. And I think it's the latter this time.
Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said, and I'm going to quote, "The solution to this issue is to fully implement the Sochi memorandum to unblock the deadlock in the Idlib de-escalation zone by separating the armed opposition from these bandits, from terrorist structures recognized as such by the UN Security Council." Is that separation as easy as it sounds to Lavrov?
You know, it's really interesting how he's making it look so simple and how he's always attributing the presence of 2% only that may be terrorists, how he's attributing all the crimes that are being taking place right now in Idlib upon them. Separating the terrorists, according to the Russians, who they are the terrorists, separating them is like being in a family household and asking the mom to separate. This child is belonging to Ahrar, this child is belonging to Free Syrian Army, that child is belonging to HTS. So how do you expect the mother to...
Are you giving an analogy, or is that how it works?
It's exactly how it is right now inside Idlib. It's all clubs. It's not something that is going to be permanent. It's all temporary. It's because the Syrian people are now being cornered and they have no other solutions. So if they decide that they are going to quit and surrender, they know from previous experiences that the regime is probably going to kill them as the men, rape their women as their wives' children, and probably demolish the rest of whatever is there as far as property. So in order for them to stand up to that kind of oppression, they were cornered. And the only fractions that they had to go to were some of them chose to go to the extremist fractions. But even those that did choose to go to the extremist fractions will not stay. The ideology that the extremists practice inside Syria right now is not very strong. And it's not solid. And it's not built on true Islam. So it's really important to understand that these people that did actually join HTS will probably eventually, very soon as Bashar falls, will probably also either be rehabilitated or disappear because they were never from the revolution anyways.
Who controls the streets right now?
A bunch of groups. A bunch of groups are actually controlling the streets. But I'll tell you what, from the last 8 years until now, we have seen so many groups come back and leave, come back and leave, come forward and then be defeated again. HTS has tried to take over Idlib several times. They never succeeded. 2 years ago in Ramadan, I was sitting in my office in Marit and Oman, and we hear missiles. So I go outside and I'm thinking it's a regime, and it was actually HTS that rocked Marit and Oman with missiles. And they actually killed one of my best friends that day. But guess what? A few months later, they were defeated and they were abolished, and we made them leave Marit and Oman. So that's what I'm trying to say. And the actual message that I would like to send is these people, these HTS, we need to just stop talking about them because they are a temporary status. They are a temporary status. We are on the ground. We know what's going on. We know who will be able to be rehabilitated and who will not. And usually those who are not able to be rehabilitated,
what do you do?
Imran,
You just leave them alone?
what do we do with them? I'm sorry?
Yeah, I mean, okay, you're saying let's not talk about HTS, but Russia basically has the support of its allies in conducting these strikes against HTS because they are internationally recognized as Al-Qaeda. What do you do with them? They're there, so what do you do?
Russia, the United Nations, the United States, the whole world is using the presence of 2% of extremists in Idlib as an excuse to allow the killings. And they are using it as a card to play against each other. This is a proxy war that we are dealing with. This is not a civil war like they are pretending. We are not fighting with people from the same affiliation. We have many people fighting us. But going back to HTS, HTS represents only 2 to 3% maximum. From my own eyewitness testimony as a Syrian American person who was educated and understands the importance of giving accurate data.
Okay.
HTS represents only 2 to 3% of the population. HTS is not popular, so the people inside their homes, when they're having private conversations, they don't like them.
Right.
They will not allow them to stay.
But they can't say it publicly, can they?
It's not their priority right now, Omran.
What's their priority right now?
Stopping the killings by the airplanes.
Let me ask you, when people are on the move, I guess you're very lucky in the sense that you also have an American passport. It makes it easier for you to travel, right? For others who only have a Syrian passport, so they're facing airstrikes from above, the terror of HTS on the ground and other groups, life's not great. When they're on the move, how does that work? Where are they going? What are their options?
It is so very sad because these people are now sleeping under the trees where there's snakes, there's scorpions, there's animals, wild animals that are biting their kids. These people, over 40 villages now have been completely evacuated from South Idlib, from Morik all the way up to almost Marit and Amman. Even Marit and Amman is almost evacuated because these people are just being faced with 2 options. Either stay in their homes and risk being killed, you never know when the strike is going to happen, or go out and stay under the trees and risk being bit or killed or go through hunger, extreme hot weather, extreme cold weather at night. What we need to do, what I am here to do, is to announce something. I would like to announce Operation Listen to the Voice of the People. I called out for this when I was still in Marit and Oman. And my people in the United States government, my best friends here in Turkey, the honorable Turkish government, they all saw that message. And I'm here to reiterate that we need to please focus on listening to the people in Syria, the people that are now sleeping under the trees. What do they want? How is it like? How can we stop this? If we can't stop this politically or militarily, how can we stop it humanitarily?
How do we stop it in a humanitarian way?
Well, we need to send them help. At least we need to send them tents. We need to send them food, hygiene products. We have to understand that these people are now very close to the borders of Turkey, and this could cause an epidemic. Anybody that has worked in the medical field understands and realizes that people that are sleeping under the trees will have to go through measures that are not very hygienic. And that's how epidemics start. So we are not realizing the full magnitude of this catastrophe.
Right.
Or we are realizing it and have gotten used to it. In order for us to not get used to these catastrophes and to be able to do something about it, we have to listen to the voice of the people. And the voice of the people inside Syria say, come be with us.
So
come see for yourself.
So help me understand this fully. The last time we spoke, you were inside Idlib. You broke out of a war zone.
Yes.
You want to go back?
I am going back very soon. I am going back I am here to announce that if God allows me and God willing, I would like to be a human shield as an American citizen for the Syrian people. I'm here to announce that I'm going to be there with them very soon. I'm not going to announce the exact date of my entry to Syria, but I'm going back inside Syria. The last time I was here on your show, I went home to the United States of America, and I met wonderful and amazing people that have inspired me and allowed me to believe that there is hope. I see great and amazing hope from the United States government. I think they are now ready to stop the oppression, at least, and they are working on it diligently and sincerely. So I trust the United States government. I believe that it is extremely important. I am going to ask this on behalf of all of the Syrian people that are inside Syria. I think it would be very much appreciated if our wonderful Turkish government here began to communicate with the American government in a more effective way on the Syrian file at least. And then we understand as Syrians that Turkish government has their own interests, and we stand with them. And we are behind them, and we respect them, and it's very important to understand that we very much appreciate the Turkish government and everything they have done for Syria. If it wasn't for the Turkish government, millions of other people would have been killed by now. So in order for them to continue their favor to us, we ask them to please improve their communications with the United States, improve their communications with the rest of the world on how they can allow immediate humanitarian assistance to enter through Bab al-Hawa and through Atmi. We need immediate assistance. We need tents. The people are sleeping on the soil.
Rania Kaiser, it's been really good to talk to you again, and we wish you all the best on your travels and with your work.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.